Hi, this is Charles Berman from the Most Important People in the World podcast, and as we're getting the podcast underway, we're not only going to be making new episodes, we're going to be playing some old interviews that I did on the Bronze Age of radio. And this is one with Gary Walters, who is the author of the book Blood on the Cross, A Death in Dallas, and The Countdown Toward Armageddon. And it's appropriate this year. It's the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which it wasn't yet when we did this interview, to bring this up. And he has some very interesting theories about that, how it ties in with just about everything, and the relationship between Kennedy and Christ. Maybe they were even the same person. Certainly an interesting possibility to consider. How seriously you consider it, it's up to you. But let's go back and listen to this interview we did with Gary Walters on Blood on the Cross, A Death in Dallas, and The Countdown Toward Armageddon. The Bronze Age of Radio, starring Charles Berman as Chris, played by Charles Berman. WHRW's only program airing at this time on this radio station, featuring interviews with people with interesting viewpoints, old-time radio programs, and more. Taking you back to a time when radio's most advanced metalworking included techniques for smelting copper and tin from naturally occurring outcroppings of copper and tin ores, creating a bronze alloy by melting those metals together. And now, the Bronze Age of Radio. Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, to the Bronze Age of Radio, where we make bronze and you get radio. I am, as always, the one, the many, Chris, played by Charles Berman, and I have two other people in the radio studio with me this evening. They are, in order of appearance on this program,
Apprentice Jackie
and the one and only Spode.
Now, as you may have noticed if you've listened to this program before, we do interviews with people with unusual opinions.
To say the least.
Then we usually have some music later on. We're going to start off with an interview here with an author of a world-changing book, possibly. Blood on the Cross, A Death in Dallas, and The Countdown to Armageddon. It's Gary G. Walters. Are you there, sir? Are you there? Hello? I will take that. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, Charles.
Yes, I'm sorry. We had a slight problem with the equipment, but now you're on the air. Gary G. Walters, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the welcome, Matt.
Now,
and greetings and salutations from the West Coast to you, sir.
Absolutely, and greetings back from the East.
How's the weather out there?
Oh, it's beautiful.
A lot better than we're getting here, I can tell you. Now, your book is very, very. It's startling in what it reveals about a lot of things that are very familiar to us, but we just didn't know how they came together. Even the title is just kind of stunning. Can you maybe give our listeners a very basic idea of what kind of things you can find in your book?
Well, I tried to convey as much of the content in the title as possible. Blood on the Cross, of course, is the crucifixion of Jesus and Christianity. A Death in Dallas is what I consider a crucifixion as well of President Kennedy in November 22nd, 1963.
Uh-huh.
And basically, the Countdown to Armageddon, if you believe biblical scholars and the people that have deciphered the prophecies, Armageddon is this coming last battle that we're facing now, probably very shortly, this final war in the Middle East.
Uh-huh.
That they would have you to believe that.
And do you think that will actually lead to Armageddon?
I think that the circumstances, I don't know if there will actually be an Armageddon as it's been predicted. I believe many of the prophecies have been misinterpreted. I think that they should be looked at not so much as something that's going to happen, but more or less warnings of what could happen if we don't change direction.
Uh-huh.
And the assassination of President Kennedy, of course, plays a lot into the prophecies. Biblical scholars will tell you also that the end-time prophecies, the United States isn't mentioned, but I think it is mentioned, and these predictions couldn't come true if the United States weren't in existence. So a lot has been misinterpreted.
So what are some of the biggest misinterpretations that we've had?
Well, I believe that the belief that the Antichrist is going to be an individual. When if you read the prophecies, anytime they're talking about a situation like that, they speak of nations, not individuals. There's a prediction in there about the Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to survive a mortal head wound, and miraculously survive, and at that point is when Satan supposedly takes over this world leader. Well, I believe that's exactly what happened with President Kennedy's assassination. He was the world leader. He represented the United States, and the United States did survive that mortal head wound. So in a sense, I believe the United States government, or elements of the United States government, is in fact the Antichrist. And while people are going to be sitting around looking for these signs that aren't going to happen, it's just going to come in through the back door like a thief in the night.
Now, if the United States government is the Antichrist, how is the war in the Middle East going to bring about Armageddon?
Well, see, this is where the United States currently is the only superpower, right? Well, the United States, based on the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they're pushing for a one-world government, and you can't have that if the United States exists as it is. So they're using the United States, like going into the Middle East and into Iraq. All that's predicted, and the point is they want to get to. They want us to drive us down to where we will have to be absorbed by some kind of a one-world order that would come to our rescue, like the current financial crisis the planet finds itself in. All that's part of the plan to reduce the United States, so that we will have to, as we're already accepting financial support from European banks. Who would have thought that would ever happen?
Right. Well, we have been doing that for a while, though. From Chinese and European banks have been integrated.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a slow slow process. It's not something that would happen overnight.
But wouldn't you say that the origination of the one world government goes back to the 1940s with the UN, the Bretton Woods agreements, and the other unifying world agreements that were worked out in the aftermath of World War II?
Oh yeah. I mean, I fully believe that the Potsdam Conference with Truman and Stalin and Churchill, that was all laid out. We are basically going to be absorbed back into some kind of a European United States of Europe.
Right.
But the United States has to go down, either financially or some way, to take our sovereignty away from us, or that could never happen.
Now, what kind of groups specifically are trying to do this? Who do you think specifically carried out the assassination of Kennedy to bring about the United States being the Antichrist? And what groups specifically are trying to create this one-world government?
Well, they have several names: the Bilderbergers, the Illuminati. I don't think it really matters what they're called. They're out there. And there's so much misinformation and smoke and mirrors that you can never pinpoint who it was. What we need to do is project ahead and use some intelligence and some cognitive reasoning to try to figure out where this is going. And basically the book is a wake-up call to the baby boomers.
Right.
There's 76 million of them, and I'm sure that if we could pull together and want to maintain the United States as a sovereign nation and keep our focus on maybe spreading the way the United States is, not forcing on it on the rest of the world militarily, but doing as President Kennedy wanted to do. He wanted, like going into Latin America, his Alliance for Progress, all these things, he wanted to raise the other countries' standard of living up to match ours so that they wouldn't want to come here. They would have it just as well at home as they could find here.
Right.
So would you advocate the United States absorbing Europe into itself, as absorbing Europe and, say, parts of Latin America into the United States instead of vice versa?
Well, if it was done with benevolence and dignity, I wouldn't advocate anyone taking over anybody else. If the situation was ripe enough that in the economy and living conditions and everything was to the point that other people would want to resemble the United States by example, that would be fine.
Now, you talk a lot in your book about baby boomers and the importance of baby boomers. Now, why would baby boomers Why are you calling out specifically to baby boomers? And if there's someone out there listening who's young in their 20s or maybe older in their 70s or 80s, why are these people left out? And if they hear your call, what can they do?
Well, no, it's not that they were left out. It's just that I focused on the biggest group, to at least because they're most of them should be in a position of stability, financially and politically. That if they get behind something to avert this course we're on, they could at least get the ball rolling. No, absolutely. The young adults, high school kids, college, they absolutely will need to follow up. Whatever the baby boomer generation or the older, it doesn't matter. If they can get behind some movement to move us away from this chasm we're headed toward, then the young adults are going to have to follow up and take over and follow through with it.
Right.
So I'm not excluding anyone.
So now, with the United States as the Antichrist, do you think the whole United States has to go, or just the government?
Well, I don't think if they're at the point yet that it would come to some kind of a major catastrophe or like an armed insurrection or anything like that. But if the voters got together, if people got together, demanded more from their elected officials, I mean, the Congress and the Senate basically have betrayed all of us, everyone to a person, and that needs to be. Our form of government is not perfect. No form of government is, but representative government, if the representatives that are watching after your best interests and would do what they're paid to do and what they're sent to do, we wouldn't be having this problem we're having right now.
Right.
So, and there would be no talk of a one world government or a one world religion or a one world currency. It wouldn't even be happening.
Which American politicians do you think have played most into the hands of creating a one world government and into the hands, inadvertently perhaps, of the Antichrist? Would you say Richard Nixon, or perhaps some of the perhaps Lyndon B. Johnson, or would you name other people?
By the way, we're joined in the studio now by the other Philip Glass.
Or Robert Glass.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it very much started with Johnson. He took over the government from John Kennedy with his murder, and that's pretty much where any direction we were headed under John Kennedy was snatched back and skewered off on a different timeline. If you want to go to the Back to the Future movies. So the future that we were on with John Kennedy skewered off with Johnson, and they followed that same track ever since. Every president since then.
Do you think there's actually a way to go back and change which timeline we're on?
I think more attention needs to be called to John Kennedy's presidency. If you watch PBS and some of these stations, they'll do a 2-hour special on all the presidents except Kennedy. When it comes down to him, they just lump it together in a special called The Kennedys, and they put the whole family in there.
Right.
They need to focus. That's why I put a lot of Kennedy's speeches unedited in the book.
Mm-hmm.
If you read his words and see where we're headed, and especially the videos and the public statements he made, I mean, it's awesome. It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. So
and I think that voice was taken out.
What do you think
leader and that guidance that we had under him?
What do you think of some of the operations that were performed under Kennedy, like the Bay of Pigs, or the first intervention into Vietnam, or the first interventions in Indonesia?
Well, the Bay of Pigs pretty much was, he believed, he came in, Eisenhower had initiated that. He told Kennedy that as far as he was concerned, that it was a good plan to go with it. Kennedy listened to his advisors instead of thinking for himself, and he said later on that was probably the best thing, as bad as it was, that could have happened to him so early in the presidency. It opened his eyes. That he needed to listen to others, but he also needed to temper that with his own judgment and his own intelligence. Mm-hmm. And the CIA tried to get him to go into Laos right after the Bay of Pigs, and he peppered him with so many questions about what the results was going to be. They couldn't answer him, so he sent him away and said, "Come back when you have a better plan."
Mm-hmm. So
Vietnam, we got into Vietnam back with beginning late with Truman and then with Eisenhower. Mm-hmm. So that was just something that carried on. And at the time of Kennedy's assassination, there was 15,000 advisors, which he had already ordered the first 1,000 home by Christmas of '63. So, and General Douglas MacArthur had warned him early on not to get into a land war in Southeast Asia, and I believe he was taking that very seriously.
What about the beginning of armed military intervention into Indonesia with the British?
With the British?
Yes, in Indonesia supporting Sukarno.
And what was that?
Yes. moving on, I guess.
Yeah. Now let's move on a little bit, because the way that you said that Armageddon may actually take place is with the war in the Middle East. How do we go from the Antichrist being the United States to this Middle Eastern war causing Armageddon potentially if we don't stop it?
Well, I don't think there's going to be an Armageddon.
Well, right, but what exactly is going on in the Middle East, and how is it related to?
Well, see, first of all, George Bush believes in the prophecies. So
right.
You get these people in power that want the second coming to happen. It's all related to the second coming of Christ. They're trying to fulfill these signs leading up to this event. So when you get someone in power with his finger on the nuclear button and commanding military and armed forces that believe these things, they're not looking at it as warnings. They're looking at it as, okay, maybe God has put me in this position to fulfill these prophecies.
Now, why do you think they want them to fulfill the prophecies? Just as a restoration of faith kind of thing, or is there some ulterior motive?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Why do you think they're trying to fulfill all these prophecies and attain this second coming? Is it like some sort of restoration of faith, or like what do they actually want to happen out of this?
Well, if you believe the prophecies, then they're setting the stage for this return of Jesus Christ, and he can't come back supposedly until all these signs have been fulfilled. So one way, that's what they're aiming for, or else that is just an illusion, and they're going to. Everybody's watching for these signs, and Jesus even said, "Beware of a generation of a seeker that seeks signs." We have these people looking for the 666, the Antichrist. All these things already may be in existence under another label or under another guise that we're not even aware of. It's just sneaking in the back door.
Right. Now, you mentioned that Kennedy was crucified. Do you see him as kind of like a Christ-like figure?
Well, I know I'm going to get on the spot here and be skewered probably, but I think John Kennedy pretty much, in the literal sense of a second coming of a Christ-like figure that could be instrumental in bringing peace to the world, I believe, yes, I believe he was that type of charismatic leader and a figure that could have, through his leadership and the growing friendship he had with Nikita Khrushchev after the missile crisis, I believe that we could have made great inroads toward that. Because basically it's the United States and the Russians that have had all these proxy wars through the years and financed them and carried out in Latin American countries and Africa and all over the world.
Right.
So if those two world leaders at that time could have come together and moved into the further into the 60s with the hippies and the way they turned with the peace and love with the right leadership, that could have been used in a very beneficial way.
What do you think of Nikita Khrushchev being removed from power by the Soviets at the same time, though?
Oh, that's in August.
Yes.
August of '64.
But the machinations were well and way by 62 and 63.
Machinations for what?
To remove Khrushchev by Brezhnev and other members of the Politburo.
Well, they made that move only because of probably Kennedy's assassination. If Kennedy hadn't been assassinated, they may not have done that.
Now, what you're describing as far as the prophecies, which is very revelatory, I think, with Kennedy being this kind of almost in a literal sense second coming kind of figure, and the United States being almost as a nation an antichrist. There are some things I don't quite understand how they fit what is generally understood about the prophecy, in that how are people going to come to believe that the United States is as a whole is a Christ figure? Will there be a kind of rapture that goes on?
Oh, no, I for one don't believe in the rapture. That's
okay.
A cushion that born-again Christians have used that they believe Jesus was the Son of God, the Savior, and died for their sins. So therefore, they don't carry that responsibility with them. So instead of seeing the world as it is and dealing with it, they're content in the fact that they're going to be saved in this rapture.
Right. Now, what do you say to people? I mean, there are a lot of other theorists who theorize about the New World Order and attempts to take over the world, but don't see it in the same terms. People like David Icke. Do sort of hold fort with them, or do you try to distance yourself?
Well, I mean, I've listened to almost all the theories. I've been studying the Kennedy assassination for 25 years. And I think everybody has a valid point, but everybody can't be right. So at some point, in the mix of all of these theories and all these conjectures and all these ideas, there is the truth. And I think that the Antichrist, I mean, when I say that the United States government is the Antichrist, I don't mean, of course, not the people.
Right, of course.
It's just a small core, a small group of men who have used the government of the United States to bring about these policies.
Mm-hmm. Do you think these people are actively trying to bring out the apocalypse and Armageddon? Or
absolutely.
So you think that the people who arranged the assassination of John F. Kennedy did it with the foreknowledge that the Armageddon would be coming as a direct result of their actions?
Yes. The direction the country was headed under John Kennedy, they could not let that continue, because the stronger America got, then the less chance that they would be able to bring America down to its knees, which is where we're headed with this global financial crisis. All these things are, and it's been a slow process. But had John Kennedy not been assassinated, had been allowed to serve his 8 years possibly, and he would have still been he'd have been a young man. He'd have been a strong force and voice in the country from then on. And with Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X was even beginning to come around to a more peaceful view of race relations. And as soon as he turned from being militant to trying to work things out, then that's when he got killed.
So you think the assassination of Malcolm X is all part of the same operation?
Exactly.
But did they do it thinking this will help weaken America and thus further our personal goals to better ourselves, or did they do it thinking this will help weaken America and thus let us rule the Antichrist to the world?
See, the goal is not, like if they wanted a one-world government based on individual liberties and the Bill of Rights and those things, that would be one thing, but they don't. They're using the Antichrist as a smoke screen. I mean, when you control everything, when you control the wealth, the materialism, the assembly line, doesn't matter what you call it. So if they're in control of it, if suddenly the financial markets crash, say the dollar becomes useless, if England or Europe has to come in with the euro, and that becomes our currency, then that's the weaker we get.
Right.
Well, and as long as America stays strong and independent and sovereign, these things can't happen.
Why do you think people would...
Can I ask?
Go on.
What about right now with the current part of the international financial crisis, where the dollar has gotten stronger and America's buying power has actually increased, whereas Europe has had the much worse of the financial crisis so far, and Europe has been doing much worse economically for the past 2 decades, whereas America has been rather healthy for a economic power. For instance, parts of Europe, France, Italy, and for part of the stretch, Germany have had negative GDP growth, whereas America has had solid 4 and 5% GDP growth. And right now, the dollar is gaining most strongly against the euro than it has since the euro's inception.
It's going to be... It's a slow process, of course. I mean, just like the gas prices. They were sky high during the summer, and now they're dropping because you can't have dueling conflicts going on. So you can't have these really high gas prices plus this financial crisis happening, or people would be in an outrage. So you balance one against the other. Gas prices come down. This is going on. Now, when this financial thing seems to settle, then the gas prices are going to go up again.
What would you say to economists who said that the collapse of the gas prices is because of the collapsing world markets and the strengthening dollar, which means that the dollar stays the same, but because it is stronger, the price of gas goes down because the dollar can buy more? And
well, it's a phase. This is just a phase we're going through. Because see, they're not ready to make their final move yet. This thing has to be done with checks and balances. It can't just come all of a sudden. They're going to have to satisfy the American people that this is something that's just happened. Like Greenspan said, this was a tsunami that come out of nowhere. That it wasn't the government's fault. That this has just happened, and now they're dealing with it. And in the course of dealing with it, we have to implement all these other things.
I think one big question that a lot of people would have here, going back a little bit, is why would people want to bring about Armageddon?
The people who want control. You can't control. If your ultimate aim is control and power, you can't do it in pockets. You want it all.
Right.
And the only way to do that is if you can gain control of the world, first of all, economically, politically. Right now, with the financial situation the way it is, if they essentially convince the world that we need to go to a cashless society, it would be better to manage the money if it was all based on computer credits, and then once you give up your financial security of having a paycheck in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
and it all becomes gigabytes in the computer, then you've basically lost your independence.
Now, when you say they and the people who want control, is there any individuals that you know are actively part of this, shall we say, cabal?
Can you name some of these powerful people?
Well, I'm sure George the First,
right,
George Herbert Walker Bush is
right.
in there.
President
of
Bush
course,
the first.
his father, Prescott Bush, was in there, and George II. I think he's pretty much just in there. I wouldn't be surprised if his dad hasn't been running things the whole time.
Mm.
Well, then why did George I lose his re-election bid against Bill Clinton?
Well, once again, it was they weren't ready to push ahead. They'd gotten as far as they needed to go at that point, and now they need to have a little breather because things, they'll get to a certain point, and then you can't push it too far.
Right.
You don't want to risk having a rebellion or people up in arms, so you take it far enough, and then Clinton comes in. Well, I'm not so sure how rosy Bill Clinton was either.
So do you think that George H.W. Bush losing his re-election bid was a planned-out move, a calculated move, or do you think it was an inadvertent effect?
I believe had he won, it would have been fine, but he didn't, so they weren't at a point that they were going to make a big deal out of it.
So
they figure, okay, now we got 4 or 8 more years, we can plan, and for all we know, the plan was to get George II in there anyway. That gave them time enough to do that. So it's just a long process they're going through. But ultimately, we're the ones that are going to get cut up in the meat grinder.
Okay, now you talked about some of the great achievements that John F. Kennedy would have made if he'd stayed alive. What kind of impact do you think people like his brother Ted Kennedy have had?
What kind of impact they would have had?
Well, what kind of impact do you think Ted Kennedy has had?
Well, in my opinion, I think Ted Kennedy's I say in the book that they killed Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy because they couldn't blackmail them.
Uh-huh.
That all this about Marilyn Monroe and all these affairs, if whoever in the FBI had any proof of this, they could have blackmailed them into submission, but they didn't have anything, so they had to kill them. I believe, as tragically as it sounds, that Teddy Kennedy was set up at Chappaquiddick. I believe that poor Miss Mary Jo Kopechne was, and if any member of the family is listening to this, I'm sorry. I think that she was probably dead before that car ever went off the bridge. And they have used that to blackmail him all these years.
Mm-hmm.
So, same with Martin Luther King Jr., they couldn't blackmail him.
what do you say to the self-admitted mistresses of JFK and to the FBI archives, which have recorded conversations of these mistresses talking with the Teamsters who the FBI were wiretapping, and with the recorded minutes of J. Edgar Hoover going to JFK and saying, we have these recorded minutes of your mistress talking to to these Teamsters, and we also have pictures of her coming in and out of your house when you were still running for election in '60.
Were they maybe paid off, or do you think...
Yeah, I mean, you can fake audio tapes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, experts can do anything.
Right.
But even saying that's true, I don't think it takes away from the fact that John Kennedy was the man he was. He wasn't perfect. He probably had his weaknesses, but we don't know anything about that for sure. All we have is the public persona of the man, and what went on during his administration, his vision, his drive, let's go to the moon. We went to the moon. Mm-hmm. You have to have a leader with vision and with a force of will.
So who today, do you see anyone today who could be a Kennedy-like figure?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe there is.
What do you think of popular comparisons in some circles of the media of Barack Obama to John F. Kennedy?
I believe at this stage of our history, I don't think there's anyone that would be above being tainted by the real power structure. The ones who want these are going after these world goals and these aims, and I don't think there's anybody strong enough now, I mean, it's been 45 years since Kennedy's assassination, or soon will be. They've had 45 years to sew this thing up so tight you couldn't get a flea through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's anybody at this point on. I believe it's just going to be a visual spokesman
Right.
to take the heat. I don't believe there's anything they can really do.
You mention also in your book some parallels between Pearl Harbor and September 11th, in that they both are strongly suspected to have been either set up or allowed to happen by the U.S. government.
Right. Well, I believe Franklin Roosevelt probably suffered a great deal about the decision he had to make, but he found us in a war here, or on the verge of. Germany was raging war. Japan was rampaging in the Pacific, and we were at neutral, and there was a lot of people that wanted us to remain neutral. So he really needed a catalyst that we needed to be attacked to whip up American support to get into the war. I think they did crack the codes, and he was aware of it, but I'm sure he wrestled with his conscience, but he had to let it happen in order to pull us into the war.
What do you think about Woodrow Wilson involving America in World War I? Do you think that was an equally monumentous step towards a one-world government in Armageddon?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm working on the second book now, and I'm into that now about Wilson and World War I.
So this has been a long time progress of this attempt at a one-world government, hasn't it?
Well, I don't believe it really kicked in until after World War II. When we had the bomb, we were at the top of the heap, and I believe that's when maybe the mentality started.
But Wilson himself tried to found the League of Nations.
Right, but that was probably with the best of intentions. He's seen a place where the nations could get together, talk over their differences, work out their problems, and try to alleviate, try to stop war. So, as any good thing can be twisted and turned once people get into power.
So can you give us...
As a matter of fact, that's the way most things are passed on to the public. It starts out as a beneficial good thing for everyone, but they don't see the darker side of it.
Right. Can you give us a little hint about what will be in your second book?
Actually, I'll pick up where the first one left off. I talk about World War I and about how America, while we were stayed out of the war and everyone was focused on Germany, we were down in Latin America, basically establishing bases everywhere. We were pretty much taking over Latin America during that time while everyone was focused on Europe. And I'm getting into rock and roll and how the creative process, these one-world people, whatever they are, aliens or whoever's manipulating this thing, how they use creativity to tap in because...
Is rock and roll good or bad, or is it being influenced?
Oh, no, rock and roll. I have a lengthy part on Elvis Presley, the British invasion. I think that rock and roll music is America at its revolutionary best, I think.
Now, you mentioned
raunchy.
The possibility that the people in control of this might be aliens. Do you think that's likely?
Well, I'm pretty open-minded, so I don't close off anything. I would never tell anyone that I didn't believe their faith or what they believed or what. I mean,
right.
I would be open to. I mean, if you read about the second coming of Christ, that reads just like a alien invasion. So, I mean, anything's possible. I think it's when we close our mind to those possibilities is when we start having problems.
Right. Before we get closer to letting you go, which we'll do at about 20 or 20 after, go into a little bit about September 11th and how that played into it all, because you have some sections on that in the book. Well,
I believe, Osama bin Laden basically was created by the CIA during the Afghanistan war with the Soviets. So he was known within the intelligence community. Now, Bush, they all knew about these terrorists taking these flight training classes. Bush was told in August of 2001 by Condoleezza Rice that these things were happening. And I'm not saying that they were a part of it, but it happening helped them because they wanted to push this Patriot Act, which I mentioned in the book, actually goes back to Nixon.
Right, you did say that in the book.
Yeah, the first 3 months he was in office.
The Nixon plan.
They came to him with a plan for wiretapping, surveillance, a way that they could declare martial law in the case of an emergency. So that plan has kind of existed and been worked on through the years. Well, now it's known as the Patriot Act, due directly related to the September 11 attacks. So whether they had anything directly to do with it, I don't know, but they certainly knew about it and let it happen, and they've benefited from it.
What do you say to the common defense by certain people that the Patriot Act is nothing more than a codification and a unifying law of pre-existing regulations that were on the books under many different regulations that were implemented throughout Clinton and throughout George Bush Sr. and throughout Ronald Reagan's presidencies, and that there's nothing inherently new in the Patriot Act that was not already legislated in America before?
Yeah, but it seems like it was scattered out. The Patriot Act actually puts it all together.
Yes, so
puts them into one act, and I believe there's a lot in that Patriot Act that we don't know. We're not aware of how far the FBI can go in their surveillance or searching your home.
Well, it is a written law. I mean, it's written down. You can read everything that's in it, though, right?
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can pull it up, but most of the Congress and Senate that signed for it didn't read it.
Right, that's true.
So, and I also mentioned in the book there's no such thing as a temporary program. So, temporary government program.
That's been borne out by a number of programs which have been claimed to be temporary. Income tax, for instance.
True.
Now, with all this that we've learned, I mean, about John F. Kennedy, about these people who are trying to make a one world government, what can we do? What kind of steps can we take if we're out there listening, especially people you say in the baby boomer generation, but also younger people and older people? What can we do to try and prevent this one world government and try and prevent Armageddon?
Well, we need to get together. We need to act. We need to make our representatives responsible. We need to write letters. We need to call them. If I was allowed to ask Obama or John McCain a question, I would ask them, do you believe the Warren Commission report on the assassination of John Kennedy? And depending on their answer, I guarantee you both of them would say, well, yeah, I believe the official verdict. Well, that right there tells me that they're just following along by the way they're being led. They're not, because no sane person could, or intelligent person that knows anything about it could still believe that. But I bet you if you asked either one of them, they would say yes. And that's where I kind of lost respect for Clinton, because when he first came up and was running for president, he aligned himself very closely to John Kennedy. But then when he was asked about the Warren Commission report, he said he believed it. So,
well, isn't it possible to believe in a lot of the things that Kennedy said and the things that Kennedy stood for, but not believe that he was but still believe the report about how he died?
True. Yes, exactly. I mean, the man and the message is more important than how he died, because we will probably never know that beyond speculation. But we do know what the man stood for. We have his speeches. We have videos that we can watch and we can listen. And there needs to be more emphasis placed on his presidency in the schools, in the colleges. But I don't believe that's being done, because they don't want to call attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you think the cover-up of Kennedy's assassination first began? Would you say it began in the Department of Justice, or that it began with Lyndon Johnson, or was it a completely extra-governmental affair?
I believe it was selected individuals in each department. It doesn't take a whole lot of people to pull something like that off. You just have to be in a position that you can collect all the evidence, that you're in control of the investigation. So I believe it was probably just a small handful of people at the top. It's not a big major thing.
Can you name any of the people who were involved in it?
Well, I stated in my book that he was actually shot by Secret Service agent William Greer, who was driving the limo, and you can see that in the Zapruder film. If you watch it, you can see it. It's right there.
Wouldn't people have noticed that it was at very short range then?
Well, the doctor's reports from Parkland was that it looked like he had been shot in the face with a handgun.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What about people who were...
Also, in the Warren Commission report about the condition of the presidential automobile, I have it in the back of the book. They found bullet fragments, witnesses said that two shots came on top of each other real quickly.
Right.
I believe that the first shot, the first shot was a railroad torpedo that got everybody looking in other directions. Then the shots were coming from different directions when William Greer finally had. You see this guy's hand go up in the Zapruder film, and then there's a black umbrella that opens. I believe that was signals to Kellerman, who was riding shotgun, Roy Kellerman, and William Greer. That was a signal to them that Kennedy had not went down. And that's when he was forced to pull out his gun and shoot him. And then in his haste to turn back around, he fired the gun a second time, and that bullet struck the inside windshield of the limo.
What about people who were in the car who did not think that he shot Kennedy, like Jacqueline Kennedy or Jackie Kennedy?
Sorry?
What do you think about people like Jackie Kennedy or other onlookers who were right next to the limo who did not report a similar William Greer shooting Mr. Kennedy or President Kennedy?
Well, why they didn't report it?
Yes. Do you think?
Well, it happened so quick. I mean, it happened in the space of 6 seconds.
It's hard to see.
So, I think Jackie may have seen something, but Clint Hill, who's a Secret Service agent on the follow-up car that finally reacted after the fatal headshot, even though a few cars back, Lyndon Johnson's Secret Service agent, Rufus Youngblood, at the very first sound of what they thought was a shot, he had went over the seat or into the car and covered Johnson's body. But it wasn't until the fatal headshot that the Secret Service agents in the follow-up car to Kennedy even reacted.
Mm-hmm. So finally, when we're wrapping this up a little bit, but when we're writing to our representatives and trying to influence to fight this New World Order, because you've awakened this knowledge of it in our minds, what do we say to them? What do we want them to do, and how do we influence them? Because they're not all part of the New World Order. How do we?
No.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, in '79, after a congressional investigation into the assassinations of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King, they recommended to the Justice Department that they reopen the case. It was never done. So we need to write our congressmen, our representatives, and tell them that until this country can move forward, we have to resolve this that happened in the past, because this is what talk about a catalyst. The assassination of President Kennedy has been the catalyst that has pushed this now in the direction we're in. Mm-hmm. And we need to call more attention to that. We need to reopen that investigation. We need to have independent people do it. I mean, when JFK, the film came out, which is a must-see film, you have to see it, Oliver Stone's film, George Bush, who was president at the time, made a deal about, well, we're going to open up the files, we're going to go in there, and we're going to release all this information. Well, in fact, he was just going in. That film had caused so much attention, they went in there to make sure they hadn't missed something, or make sure that they hadn't left something in there that could be incriminating. That's the reason there was this big deal about opening the files.
Right. So finally, let's repeat once again. The book is called...
It's Blood on the Cross,
A Death in
Dallas, and the Countdown Toward Armageddon.
So how can we get a copy of this?
Okay, right now it's only available on the Internet. It's at www.authorhouse.com bookstore.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a website people can go to?
I'm working on... let's see, it's www.arthurtree/Einstein.
Okay.
Arthurtree/Einstein,
and the Blood on the Cross, A Death in Dallas, and the Countdown to Armageddon.
Yes.
So, Gary G. Walters, thank you very much for coming on with us.
All right, Charles, thank you very much, and welcome me back again sometime.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, gentlemen.
No problem. Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
All right, this is the Bronze Age of Radio. That was Gary G. Walters from Blood on the Cross, A Death in Dallas, and the Countdown to Armageddon.
Interesting fellow.
Yes.